The deafening crack of a gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of Fort Collins, Colorado Territory, 1875, as Beatrice Keller clutched her medical bag tighter and rushed toward the commotion. At 42, with streaks of silver threading through her once auburn hair, she moved with purpose despite the whispers that followed her whispers about a woman doctor being an oddity, especially one who had arrived just 3 months ago with secrets etched into the lines around her eyes. The man sprawled in the dirt outside the saloon was bleeding profusely from his shoulder, a crowd of onlookers gathering with morbid fascination. Beatrice knelt beside him, ignoring the mud seeping into her skirts as she assessed the wound with practiced hands. "Someone help me get him to my clinic," she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of 2 decades of medical practice. A tall figure stepped forward from the crowd, shadow falling across her work. "I've got him, madam." Beatrice glanced up, squinting against the harsh sunlight to see a weathered face beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Warm hazel eyes met hers, and strong hands gently lifted the injured man. "This way," she directed, leading the stranger who carried her patient with surprising gentleness for his imposing frame. At her small clinic, a converted front room of the boarding house where she rented a modest apartment upstairs, Beatrice worked efficiently to remove the bullet while the tall cowboy assisted without complaint, following her curt instructions precisely. "Will he live?" The cowboy asked when she finally straightened, wiping blood from her hands. "If infection doesn't set in," Beatrice sighed, suddenly aware of the ache in her back from bending over her patient. "Thank you for your help, Mr. Wyatt Daniels." He removed his hat, revealing sun-bleached brown hair and a face that had seen its share of hard living, though she guessed him to be in his mid-30s. "I've just bought the Marshall Ranch outside town. Beatrice Keller." She offered a tired smile, the town's reluctant doctor, reluctant. His eyebrow raised with curiosity. "Fort Collins wasn't exactly in my plans." She began cleaning her instruments, a habit so ingrained she barely thought about it. Life has a way of redirecting your course when you least expect it. That it does. Something in his tone made her look up, catching a flicker of understanding in his eyes before he replaced his hat. "I'll check on him tomorrow if that's all right, of course." After he left, Beatrice sat heavily in her chair, watching her sleeping patient. Fort Collins was meant to be merely a stopping point somewhere to rest before continuing west to San Francisco, where her medical skills might be better appreciated than in the small Pennsylvania town she'd fled. But her funds had dwindled faster than expected, and illness had kept her bedridden for weeks. Now, the town had reluctantly accepted her services in the absence of another doctor, though she sensed their distrust of a female physician. 3 days later, Wyatt returned, not to check on the patient who had already been discharged, but with an injured ranch hand who had taken a nasty fall from a horse. "You're keeping me busy, Mr. Daniels," Beatrice remarked as she set the young man's broken arm. "Good doctors are hard to come by out here." His eyes followed her movements with interest. "Where did you train?" "Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania." She didn't add that she'd been among the first classes of women to graduate, and before you ask, yes, it's a real medical school. His lips quirked. "Never doubted it for a second, madam." Over the following weeks, Wyatt seemed to find various reasons to visit her clinic, a cut needing stitches, a ranch hand with fever, supplies he thought she might need brought from Denver. Each time, he lingered a little longer, their conversations stretching beyond the immediate medical concern. Beatrice found herself looking forward to his visits, even as she reminded herself of the futility of such feelings. Her life had taught her harsh lessons about hope and attachment. Her husband's death 10 years ago had left her with nothing but debts and painful memories. The subsequent scandal accusations of improper treatment that had driven her from her practice in Philadelphia still haunted her. Fort Collins was supposed to be a brief respite, not a place to put down roots. One evening in late August, Wyatt arrived as she was closing her clinic, a small bouquet of wildflowers in his hand. "Evening, Doc." His smile seemed almost shy. "Thought you might like these. Found them by the creek this morning." "They're beautiful," she admitted, accepting them with hesitation. "But Mr. Daniels, Wyatt, please." "Wyatt." His name felt intimate on her lips. I'm not sure what you're hoping for, but I should be clear I don't intend to stay in Fort Collins permanently. Where are you headed? He leaned against her doorframe, seemingly unbothered by her declaration. San Francisco eventually. I had a colleague write that women doctors are finding more acceptance there. He nodded thoughtfully. Sounds like a fine plan. In the meantime, would you allow me to escort you to the harvest dance this Saturday? The directness of his request caught her off guard. I'm too old for dances, she laughed, though the sound held little humor. Nonsense. His eyes crinkled at the corners. Everyone dances in this town, it's practically mandatory. Before she could formulate another excuse, a commotion erupted in the street shouts and the sound of approaching horses. They both rushed outside to see a wagon careening into town, a man frantically driving while a woman cradled what appeared to be a child in her arms. Doctor. The man called out desperately upon seeing Beatrice. My son, he's burning up. The next hours were a blur as Beatrice fought to save the 7-year-old boy with scarlet fever. Wyatt stayed, fetching water, clean linens, and whatever else she needed without being asked. By dawn, the crisis had passed, the child's fever finally breaking. You have remarkable hands, Wyatt said softly as they sat together on her porch, exhausted but relieved. The way you work, it's like watching someone born to a purpose. Beatrice stared at her hands, capable hands, weathered now with age and work. It's all I've ever wanted to do since I was a girl. She rarely spoke of her past, but the shared night of worry and relief had lowered her defenses. My father was a doctor. He used to let me read his medical texts when I was supposed to be studying scripture. A rebellious streak, Wyatt observed with a smile. I like that about you. Rebellious enough to get me into considerable trouble throughout my life. She sighed, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold. I'm too old for a new beginning, she said, more to herself than to him. Wyatt's hand covered hers, calloused but gentle. Age is just a number to me, Beatrice. It's experience that shapes us, not years. She pulled her hand away, though not unkindly. You speak like a man who hasn't seen 40 yet. 36, he confirmed. But I've buried a wife and child to cholera, lost a brother in the war, and started over more times than I care to count. Age doesn't determine when we stop living, just how much wisdom we bring to each new day. His words resonated somewhere deep inside her, touching a part of her heart she'd thought long dormant. Still, caution prevailed. I should check on my patient. Despite her resistance, Beatrice found herself at the harvest dance that Saturday, wearing her best dress, a deep blue that complemented her eyes, though the style was several years out of date. Wyatt cut a striking figure in a clean shirt and vest, his usual trail dust nowhere to be seen. He danced with assurance, leading her through waltzes and reels with a firm but respectful hand at her waist. People are staring, she murmured during a particularly lively tune. Let them, he replied, unconcerned. Most are just jealous I'm dancing with the prettiest woman here. She laughed, feeling a flush rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with exertion. Flatterer. Honest man, he corrected, spinning her with unexpected grace. As autumn painted the Colorado landscape in brilliant hues of gold and crimson, Wyatt became a regular fixture in Beatrice's life. He brought her dinner when she worked late, accompanied her on house calls to remote homesteads, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to dismantle the walls she'd built around her heart. You never speak of your wife, Beatrice observed one evening as they sat on her porch, watching the sunset. It had become their ritual, these quiet moments of shared silence after busy days. Wyatt's face softened with memory. Hannah, she was quiet but strong, loved poetry and could recite Wordsworth from memory. His voice held no bitterness, only a gentle reverence. We had 3 good years before the cholera took her and our son. I'm sorry. Beatrice knew the inadequacy of words against such loss. Life continues. He looked at her directly. Grief changes shape, but it doesn't end a man's capacity to love again. His implication hung in the air between them, unaddressed but undeniable. Beatrice changed the subject, asking about his plans for the ranch instead. As September yielded to October, a diphtheria outbreak struck Fort Collins. Beatrice worked tirelessly, moving from home to home as families fell ill. Wyatt was constantly at her side, helping transport medicines, preparing remedies under her instruction, and ensuring she ate and rested when she would have otherwise neglected herself. After a particularly devastating night where they lost a young mother despite all efforts, Beatrice collapsed into tears outside the woman's home. Without hesitation, Wyatt gathered her into his arms, holding her against his chest as she grieved. "I couldn't save her," she whispered, voice raw. "You tried, that's all anyone can do." His hands stroked her back with steady reassurance. "You can't save everyone, Beatrice. I know that." She pulled back slightly, wiping her tears with embarrassment. "I've lost patience before, but it never gets easier." "No." She looked up at him, surprised by his understanding. "It never does." He brushed a strand of hair from her face with tender attention. "That's what makes you a good doctor. You still care after all this time." The epidemic finally waned by the end of October, leaving the town in mourning but moving forward. During those difficult weeks, something fundamental had shifted between Beatrice and Wyatt. Their connection had deepened beyond friendship, forged in shared purpose and mutual respect. On the first Sunday in November, Wyatt invited Beatrice to visit his ranch. The Marshall property, now the Daniels Ranch, sprawled across rolling hills outside town, with views of the distant mountains. The modest main house had been recently repainted, and a vegetable garden showed signs of careful tending. "It's beautiful," Beatrice said honestly as Wyatt showed her around. "You've accomplished so much in just a few months." "Had good help," he acknowledged, "and a clear vision." He paused at the edge of a small apple orchard. "I've been thinking about adding more trees here, maybe cherries or plums. What do you think?" The casual way he sought her opinion touched her. "Cherries would do well in this soil, I think. My father had cherry trees back in Pennsylvania." "Cherries it is then." He smiled as if the matter was settled. "I'm building something here, Beatrice, something lasting." That evening, after a simple but delicious meal he'd prepared himself, they sat before the fireplace with cups of coffee. The domesticity of the scene wasn't lost on Beatrice, nor was the longing it stirred within her. "You've been quiet," Wyatt observed. Having second thoughts about those cherry trees, his attempt at levity made her smile despite herself. "No, the trees are a fine idea, I was just thinking." "About San Francisco?" he guessed, setting down his cup. She nodded. "Winter is coming. If I'm going to continue west, I should do it soon before the mountain passes become impassable." Wyatt studied her face in the firelight. "Is that still what you want?" The question was simple, but its implications were not. Beatrice had spent years defining herself by her profession and her independence. The idea of altering her carefully laid plans for emotional attachment terrified her. "I don't know anymore," she admitted. "I came here with such certainty about my path. Now, he prompted gently when she fell silent. "Now I find myself contemplating impossibilities." Wyatt moved to kneel before her chair, taking her hands in his. "Beatrice, there's nothing impossible about finding happiness where you least expected it. At my age, with my past," she shook her head, "I'm a woman of 42 with a history of scandal, no family connections, and very little to offer beyond my medical skills. You couldn't be more wrong." The intensity in his voice compelled her to meet his gaze. "You offer compassion, intelligence, courage, and yes, those remarkable hands that heal. But more than that, you offer the possibility of a partnership that I never thought I'd find again." Her heart thundered in her chest. "Wyatt, I'm not asking for promises." He squeezed her fingers gently. "Just asking you to consider that your journey might have brought you exactly where you're meant to be." The ride back to town was quiet, both lost in thought as the stars emerged above them. When they reached her boarding house, Wyatt helped her down from his wagon with careful hands. "Think about what I said," he asked, not pressing for an immediate answer. "I will." She hesitated, then impulsively rose on tiptoes to press a kiss to his cheek. "Thank you for today." His smile followed her inside, warming her thoughts as she prepared for bed. The decision facing Beatrice consumed her thoughts in the days that followed. She found herself making mental lists, reasons to continue to San Francisco versus reasons to stay. The latter list grew longer each day, with Wyatt's name featuring prominently. A week after their visit to the ranch, a knock came at her clinic door just before closing. She opened it to find not Wyatt, but a harried-looking young woman clutching a letter. "Are you Dr. Keller?" The woman asked, breathless from running. "This came for you on today's post." The postmaster said it seemed important, marked urgent-like. Beatrice thanked her and closed the door, breaking the seal with curiosity. The letter bore a San Francisco address, her colleague, Dr. Margaret Harper. "Dear Beatrice, I write with promising news. An opportunity has arisen at our women's clinic that would suit your skills perfectly. Dr. Jensen is retiring at year's end, and we are in desperate need of a physician with your experience and dedication. The position includes housing and a most generous stipend." The letter continued, detailing the particulars of what once would have seemed like a dream opportunity. Now, Beatrice read it with conflicting emotions. Here was everything she had hoped for: professional recognition, security, a community of like-minded women physicians, yet the prospect filled her with an unexpected melancholy. She was still staring at the letter when another knock sounded. This time it was Wyatt, his expression brightening when she opened the door. "I brought you some of those preserves Mrs. Fletcher made." He stopped, noticing the paper in her hand and her troubled expression. "Bad news." "Not bad exactly." She invited him inside and handed him the letter. "An opportunity in San Francisco." He read it silently, his face carefully neutral. When he finished, he returned it to her with gentle hands. "Seems like just what you've been waiting for." "Yes." She folded the letter slowly. "It's everything I thought I wanted." Thought. He caught the past tense immediately. Beatrice moved to the window, looking out at the town that had somehow, despite all her intentions, begun to feel like home. "I keep telling myself that I'm too old to change course again, too set in my ways to build something new." "And what does your heart tell you?" Wyatt asked, his voice closer now as he moved to stand behind her. "My heart hasn't had much say in my decisions for a very long time." She turned to face him. "I learned early that following it led to pain." "Sometimes it does," he agreed. "But sometimes it leads to exactly where we're meant to be." The sincerity in his eyes was almost her undoing. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Of what?" "Of hoping, of believing in possibilities at my age, of," she gestured between them, "of this." Wyatt took her hands in his. "Beatrice, when I came to Fort Collins, I was looking for land to build a cattle operation. I wasn't looking for a sharp-tongued, stubborn, magnificent woman who would turn my world upside down. But here we are." Despite herself, she laughed. "Is that how you see me, sharp-tongued and stubborn?" "And magnificent," he reminded her, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Don't forget that part." The tenderness of the gesture melted something inside her. "I need to think, Wyatt. This isn't a decision I can make lightly. Take all the time you need." He released her hands reluctantly. "I'll be here." The following Sunday, Beatrice declined Wyatt's invitation to dinner, claiming a patient needed monitoring. It wasn't entirely untrue. Mrs. Abernathy's newborn son was struggling to nurse, but her primary motivation was to create space for clear thought. After checking on mother and child, finding both improved, Beatrice walked the quiet streets of Fort Collins. The town had transformed in her eyes over these months from a temporary way station to a community with familiar faces and daily rhythms. She knew which families were expecting children, which farmers suffered from rheumatism, which children were prone to earaches. Her steps took her past the half-constructed schoolhouse where she had advised on proper lighting and ventilation. Past the general store where Mr. Peterson always set aside the latest medical journals that came in from Denver. Past the church where she had attended precisely 3 services before deciding the minister's views on women's proper place were incompatible with her temperament. This wasn't Philadelphia or Boston, but neither was it the backward frontier outpost she had initially judged it to be. There was growth here, possibility, and there was Wyatt. The thought of him brought both warmth and uncertainty. At 42, she had believed romantic love was behind her. Even in her marriage to Thomas, passion had been secondary to shared intellectual interests and practical compatibility. What she felt for Wyatt was different, more visceral, more consuming, and therefore more frightening. Lost in contemplation, she barely noticed the first drops of rain until they became a steady downpour. She hurried toward her boarding house, but the skies opened fully when she was still several blocks away. Ducking under the nearest awning, she found herself outside the telegraph office, closed for Sunday but offering momentary shelter. As she stood dripping and chagrined, a familiar wagon pulled up, Wyatt jumping down and splashing through puddles to reach her. "Thought that was you," he called over the drumming rain. "Need a ride? How did you know I'd be here?" she asked, accepting his offered hand. "I didn't." He helped her into the wagon, covering her shoulders with his coat. "I was heading to check on the Abernathys myself, make sure they had enough firewood in this weather. Spotted you by chance." "Providence, perhaps," she murmured, huddling into the warmth of his coat, which smelled of leather, pine, and his distinctive scent. "Maybe so." He clicked to the horses, turning them toward her boarding house. "Though I'm beginning to believe that nothing about you and me is accidental, Beatrice." At her door, he insisted on seeing her inside despite her protests about his own soaked condition. Her landlady, Mrs. Holloway, clucked disapprovingly at their dripping state but quickly provided towels and the promise of hot tea. "You're shivering," Wyatt observed as they stood in her small sitting room, the connected examination room dark and quiet for the evening. "I'm fine." But her chattering teeth betrayed her. "Stubborn woman," he said, but with such fondness that it sounded like an endearment. "Go change into something dry, I'll wait." When she emerged in a simpler dress, hair hastily pinned up after toweling it dry, she found Wyatt had built up the small fire in her hearth. He stood as she entered, his own clothes still damp but less sodden. "Better?" he asked. "Much." She hesitated, then gestured to the chair opposite hers. "You should stay until the rain lets up. Mrs. Holloway is bringing tea." They sat in companionable silence until the promised tea arrived, along with a plate of ginger cookies that the landlady insisted would ward off any chill. When they were alone again, Beatrice found herself studying Wyatt's face in the firelight, the creases around his eyes, the set of his jaw, the way his hair curled slightly when wet. "I've made my decision," she said suddenly. Wyatt set down his teacup carefully. "About San Francisco?" "Yes." She took a deep breath. "I'm declining the position." His expression remained cautious, as if afraid to hope. "May I ask why?" "Many reasons." She looked into the fire. "My practice here is growing. The town has no other doctor. The journey west would be difficult with winter approaching." She paused, gathering courage. "But the truth is, when I imagined leaving, the thing I couldn't bear was leaving you." The silence that followed was broken only by the crackling fire and the rain against the windows. Then Wyatt moved to kneel before her chair, just as he had that night at his ranch. "Beatrice," her name was a prayer on his lips, "I've been half afraid to tell you how I feel, worried you'd think it too soon or too presumptuous." "Tell me now," she whispered. "I love you." Simple words spoken with absolute certainty. "I love your mind, your hands, your heart. I love your dedication to healing and your refusal to be anything less than exactly who you are." Tears pricked at her eyes. "Even though I'm stubborn and sharp-tongued, especially because of that." He reached up to touch her cheek. "I don't want you to stay for me. I want you to stay because this is where you want to be, with or without me, but I desperately hope it's with me." "It is." She covered his hand with hers. "I'm choosing Fort Collins, and I'm choosing you if you'll have me." "If I'll have you," he laughed, incredulous. "Beatrice Keller, I've been yours since you ordered me to hold pressure on that gunshot wound the day we met." When he kissed her, it was with a tenderness that belied the strength in his hands and the passion in his eyes. Beatrice felt something long dormant within her spring-to-life hope, yes, but also a fierce joy that took her breath away. "I'm still too old for a new beginning," she murmured against his lips, her final resistance crumbling. Wyatt smiled against her mouth. "And I still say age is just a number. It's what we do with the time we have that matters." Their courtship proceeded with surprising speed after that night, partly due to the practical nature of both parties and partly because, as Wyatt put it, when you know, you know. By Christmas, Fort Collins had grown accustomed to seeing Dr. Keller and Mr. Daniels together at social functions, church services, or simply walking arm in arm through town. The proposal came on Christmas Eve, after midnight services. Wyatt had arranged for a sleigh to take them back to his ranch, where a small party of close friends awaited. Under a sky brilliant with stars, with snow glistening around them, he asked her to become his wife. "Are you certain?" she asked, holding the simple gold band he offered. "I may never give you children." At my age, he silenced her with a kiss. "I'm marrying you for companionship, for partnership, for love. Children would be a blessing, but you are all I need, Beatrice." They were married on New Year's Day, 1876, in the ranch house Wyatt had built, surrounded by townspeople who had become friends and colleagues who had become family. Beatrice wore a gown of deep burgundy rather than traditional white, befitting a mature bride who knew her own mind. "Dr. Daniels," Wyatt whispered as they danced their first dance as husband and wife. "I think I'll keep Keller professionally," she replied. "Less confusing for patients. Doctor." "Keller and Mr. Daniels it is, then." He spun her gently. "Though I'm rather partial to Beatrice and Wyatt when we're alone. Life as a married couple brought adjustments for both." Beatrice maintained her practice in town while living at the ranch, riding in each morning on a gentle mare Wyatt had trained specifically for her. He expanded his cattle operation, but always made time to escort her on distant house calls or help with particularly difficult cases. Their home became known for its hospitality, hosting regular Sunday dinners where ranchers and townspeople alike were welcome. Beatrice found unexpected joy in these gatherings, creating the kind of warm community she had never experienced in Philadelphia society. By spring, the ranch was thriving, with new calves in the pastures and cherry saplings taking root in the orchard. Beatrice's practice had grown to include patients from neighboring communities who sought out the lady doctor, known for her skilled hands and compassionate care. One evening in April, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Beatrice took Wyatt's hand with unusual hesitation. "I've been feeling unwell in the mornings," she began. Concern immediately crossed his face. "Are you ill? Why didn't you say something?" "Not ill." She placed his palm against her still flat stomach. Expectant, his eyes widened, disbelief giving way to wonder. "Beatrice, are you certain as 20 years of medical practice allows me to be?" She smiled tremulously. "I know it's unexpected at my age." "The risks are higher, we'll face them together," he interrupted, gathering her into his arms. Every step of the way, the pregnancy progressed without major complications, though Beatrice was practical about the dangers. She trained a young woman from town as a midwife's assistant, ensuring someone could tend to patients when she could not. Wyatt was attentive to the point of hovering, earning him frequent exasperated lectures about the normal processes of childbearing. "I delivered triplets last year during a blizzard," she reminded him after he insisted on carrying her up the porch steps. "I'm perfectly capable of walking." "Indulge me," he replied, unrepentant. "It's not every day a man gets to fuss over his pregnant wife." In November, just as the first snow dusted the mountains, Samuel Thomas Daniels entered the world after a difficult but ultimately successful birth. With his father's hazel eyes and his mother's determined chin, he was pronounced perfect by both parents. "He's beautiful," Wyatt whispered, cradling his son with tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "Just like his mother." Beatrice, exhausted but triumphant, watched them with a fullness of heart she had never imagined possible a year earlier. "Worth the wait," she murmured. "Every minute," Wyatt agreed, sitting carefully beside her on the bed, "though I would have been just as happy if it had been just the two of us." "I know." She touched their son's tiny hand, marveling as his fingers curled around hers with surprising strength. "That's why this feels like such a gift. Unexpected, unplanned, but perfect." As Samuel grew, so did the ranch and Beatrice's practice. By his first birthday, she had trained 2 more assistants and established a small infirmary for patients needing overnight care. Wyatt had built a reputation for quality cattle and fair dealing, earning respect throughout the territory. When Samuel was 2, they welcomed a daughter, Elizabeth Margaret, completing their family. Beatrice continued practicing medicine until well into her 60s, eventually focusing on training younger doctors and midwives, while Wyatt gradually passed ranch operations to Samuel, who showed his father's aptitude for the work. On the evening of their 25th wedding anniversary, they sat on the same porch where they had shared so many conversations, now gray-haired but still vibrant. The ranch had grown prosperous. Their children were building their own lives, Samuel running the ranch, Elizabeth studying medicine in Denver, and Fort Collins had blossomed into a thriving town. "Do you ever regret not going to San Francisco?" Wyatt asked, their hands intertwined as naturally as breathing. Beatrice considered the question seriously, as was her way. "Not for a moment," she finally answered. "I found my purpose here as a doctor, yes, but also as your wife, as a mother, as part of this community." "Even though you were too old for a new beginning," he teased, referencing words spoken decades earlier. She leaned against his shoulder, comfortable in the love that had sustained them through joys and hardships alike. "You were right, as much as it pains me to admit it." "Age truly is just a number." Wyatt pressed a kiss to her silver hair. "The best decision I ever made was bringing that injured man to your clinic that day." "The best decision I ever made was staying," Beatrice replied, watching the sunset paint the Colorado sky in shades of promise. "Finding you, loving you, it taught me that new beginnings can happen at any age, as long as you're brave enough to embrace them." As twilight deepened around them, they remained on their porch, two people who had found in each other not just love, but partnership, respect, and the courage to begin again, regardless of the number of years behind them.